Okay, welcome everyone to Chart's free webinar series. Chart, as most of you know, is an association of hospitality trainers. We have 2 conferences a year, as well as regional meetings, free webinars, and several other benefits. You can find any information about Chart on our website, chart.org, including a full library of previously recorded webinars that are all kept under an hour, so you can really continue your hospitality training from your own desk. Today we have Jerry Fernandez with us, talking about de-escalation and unconscious bias. Welcome, Jerry.
Thanks, Tara. Welcome everyone to the webinar and what we hope will be an engaging and exciting hour of content. Let me start by saying sometime between the year 2046 and 2050, America will become a majority minority country. That means non-whites will be the majority. What does that mean for us as an industry? Well, what does it mean for America? You can tell by looking at a number of incidents that are occurring around the country. Cross-cultural conflict is a big part of change, and change is never easy. So in our session today, I have 4 objectives that I want to try to cover as we go through the content. Is give you a definition of bias and unconscious bias, which is at the root of much of misunderstanding across cultural groups and about people and circumstances. Secondly, to introduce the concept of de-escalation and emphasize some of the key elements of what de-escalation is and how we as hospitality, restaurant, lodging professionals can do a better job at minimizing issues. Third, look at some real world scenarios. We only have time to cover 2, but we have a lot more in our lexicon, and when we get the slides available for folks, we'll make sure that some of those other scenarios are put in there as well. And then, of course, we want to take your questions, and hopefully we have answers for all of them. We have some recommendations and a list of resources. So first, a little bit about MFHA. The Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance has been around since 1996. We're an advocate for our industry. We're an advocate for inclusion. We promote our industry as a great place for people to work because, unbeknownst to some of you, some cultural groups, some ethnic groups, some racial groups don't think our industry is a place for people like them. We also have always advocated to promote for minority business entrepreneurs because healthy businesses in minority communities make healthy communities. We focus on delivering strategy, best practices, learning and development solutions, and of course, networking and bringing you all together is one of our most important functions. As you think about diversity and inclusion, this definition has evolved throughout our organization, and this is what we believe is the most intelligent way, a most appropriate way to look at bringing people together. Diversity of thought, perspective, and experience is the goal because we deliver better results. When people feel included, they have the opportunity to rise in their organizations to their own levels of discipline and talent. With inclusion, everyone wins, all right? So I didn't mention race, ethnicity, or color. So for people who sometimes get hung up on those aspects, diversity of thought, perspective, and experience is what we really want. We have 4 solutions: unconscious bias, live workshops, e-learning, and webinars, building your cultural IQ to improve customer engagement, leadership and professional development, as we said, because it's slightly different for women and people of color. And then, of course, once you learn all that, you can really engage the community to drive customers and talent. Okay, so a few more things before I jump into the real content. There is a tremendous amount of diversity among people and organizations and things we'll talk about in here. So not everything applies to everyone, so don't take it too literal, but facts matter, and we have footnoted for all the data, and we always practice straight talk. We tell you what it is, and we don't try to hide it. So let's start with bias and unconscious bias. And what is it? And we're going to start with a video. Might be helpful if I could get it to run. We all have voices in our head telling us what to think and to feel and to do. We have 11 million bits of information coming at us at any given time. Only problem is you can only process 40 in real time. Our brain is taking shortcuts all the time. We make assumptions, and we all know what happens when we make assumptions. We usually lead us to the wrong decision, and that is where blind spots come from. They influence our choices. We've been on both ends of blind spots, both when we've received good and when we've received bad. So it's important that our choices, we know, have consequences. So what we have to do is work on accepting that we have blind spots. If we accept those blind spots, we can deliver better outcomes and give much better customer service to our employees and to our guests. So let's talk a little bit about bias in terms of literally, what does it mean? It's the immediate mental reactions that result in judgment without question. It's automatic. It happens real time, and it really has a lot to do with how we were raised, where we came from, what our life experiences were. As I said, think about bias as a shortcut. It's the way we see the world, the way we interact with all people and circumstances around us. So what do you think the purpose of bias is? What does it serve? Is bias good or is bias bad? What are the examples of positive bias versus negative bias? Well, a positive bias is I have a bias towards nice people. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also have a bias that when I smell smoke at 3 o'clock in the morning in my home, I get concerned because it might mean that we're on fire. All right? Now, there are lots of examples of negative bias, and you just think about what biases do we have about people who look different from us? What biases do you have about gay, black, women, East Coast, West Coast? I have a bias against the Yankees, if that matters to any of you, because I'm a Red Sox fan. So you can see all of our background socialization. But bias is also a protection mechanism. It keeps us safe. And when we were back in the days where we hunted in packs, we had to worry about who that person coming across the prairie was. Were they friend or foe? So one of the things that bias does, it helps you determine very quickly whether you have an enemy or an ally in front of you. And it also is very persistent because once you process someone as a foe, it takes 20% more oxygen to reprocess them as friend. So what does that mean for us in the restaurant industry? If somebody decides, this job is not for women, or we only want people who go to culinary school to work in our kitchens, we have blind spots, and we leave good candidates and good people out of the mix. We also have these blind spots show up when we serve guests. When we make assumptions that, black people don't tip or single women don't tip, all sorts of bad things, bad outcomes can come from that. So let's talk a little bit about unconscious bias. Some would call it hidden bias. It really should be called subconscious bias because it's all that bias, those shortcuts happening in our subconscious. They're subtle and they happen to all of us all the time. It affects our attitudes, things we prefer or don't prefer. It creates stereotypes across different groups. And from our birth to this very moment, we're developing them all the time. So some characteristics of unconscious bias. Many of you have probably seen this iceberg. There are those things that are highly visible, and then those things that are not so visible. Problem with unconscious bias or implicit bias, it's they're pervasive and strongly held. They favor our in-group. So I have bias about people who look like me, bias about men that are positive. And if you're true to yourself, we all can find examples where that is also true. The problem is sometimes what you say and what you do don't align. I've always believed that I was an advocate for women. And unfortunately, at one of our events years ago, I focused on talking to my board chair and mentioning her dress, her looks, her hair, her earrings, completely overlooking her contributions. And boy, did I hear about it. It stuck with me to this day. So bias and unconscious bias, it's real, has real world effects. And the good news is we can unlearn that bias. We can catch that bias, learn to hit the pause button. And guess what? If you can hit the pause button, stop and think for a moment about what you're actually making an assumption about, you can actually choose to do things differently. So one of the tips in bias is watch your first thoughts. You ever meet somebody you don't like right away and you have no good reason? Catch yourself. Are they reminding you of someone from your past? Hit that pause button. Allow your rational thinking. Hey, this guy has tattoos all over his body. He might not be the right person for us. Oh, hit the pause button. What the heck do tattoos have to do with how good an employee or how productive a customer he's going to be, or she? Think about changing your behaviors consciously. Once you start seeing bias and thinking about it, you're going to catch yourself doing it. And you can do things to change it, particularly like building relationships with people who are different from you, okay? If you didn't grow up with Latinos, go find a way to get connected to the Hispanic Latino community. It'll make a big difference in the way you see them and the way you serve them. So in summary, bias is normal and natural. We all have bias. To be human is to have bias. Your brain works, you have bias. It can be positive or negative. It just is. And learning to overcome it is going to make all the difference in the results that we have. So hit that pause button, okay? Don't hesitate and look to build some relationships. So, said well by Gloria Steinem, the first problem with all of us, men and women, is not to learn, but to unlearn the things that we have about each other and about circumstances. So now I'm going to move into de-escalation. I want you to look at this image because we're going to come back to this a little bit later, and we're going to watch the video. If you've already seen it, well then, you know, don't spoil it for others, okay? Now that video is disturbing, I must admit, and I apologize for the ringing in your ear that you might have had by bleeping out all the expletives. But there was a bunch of things that went wrong in that relationship, and a lot of things that when you learn and understand de-escalation, you build into how you set things up so that you can minimize the likelihood of violence occurring, okay? A bunch of things. Unfortunately, the manager ended up finishing the order for that guest, which never should have happened. And the young lady who was throwing those really powerful punches is a kickboxer. That's why she's so good at it. So let's move to what I want to cover in this section of the webinar. It's so important that you have open, positive communications. You can't go into this conversation, to this meeting with a guest or an employee or the community with prejudging, because that will show up in your body language. Active listening, your trainers, you folks should know that. You know, it's important you listen with your ears, you listen with your eyes, you listen with your body. You want to look for cultural cues. We'll talk a little bit about that. That will give you an indication of which way your response might need to be. Always important is giving people choices, okay? You don't want to put a person in a corner. It's like if you put a snake in the corner, they bite. But if you give them outlets, places, choices where they can go with limits, you frequently can get out of trouble before you get too far in. And then we'll look at some scenarios. So be aware of potential conflict. It can happen in any of our restaurants, hotels, or circumstances. And if you talk to your staff, there are going to be some things that probably already come up. You got to practice this stuff. So once you get these things identified, you write down what these de-escalation steps should be and let people practice them at pre-shift or anywhere else. It's like anything else. You don't get good at it until you practice it. Talk to team members. Fair, firm, and consistent policies are critical in all this, and always treat people with respect. Now, I'm going to go through these slides, and I'm not going to cover every point because it's only an hour and there's a lot here. So I think that what will be useful when you go back to this in the recorded session, you'll be able to look a little closer at some of the points I've made. Okay? So open communication. This is all about verbal. Verbal is the way to handle things. We don't want to be in the instance of using physical force. I don't say never, because if a customer is beating up another customer or an employee, which we've seen this happen, you have to have a way to try to separate them. But when you get involved in physical force, someone gets hurt, usually you or one of your teammates. There are de-escalation things, is the removing barriers, and the communication barrier is all what you see under this slide, where prejudging, not listening, critical. You know, these things make sense to all of us, but unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, people frequently don't do what they're supposed to do. So the next point I want to make up is I want to point out is words matter. We know words matter. Sometimes we forget that. So being positive, I want to help you. I'm sure we can get this out. And that also means posture, your posture. How do you approach the table? Do you have your arms crossed, in a way, or your hands at your side with your arms and your palms up, open? Say, hey, how can I help you? This next slide shows body language. Does that young lady look like she's really satisfied? What is her body language saying to you? I know it makes me feel like my mother. She used to look at me when I did something wrong like that. But 60 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal, and context matters. And are you using multiple gestures? Are you smiling? Are your hands moving? Are you tapping your foot? All of these things can be viewed by the other person as signs of escalation. What you want to do is be in control and be calm. So more on body language. When people are angry, what do? Right? They get loud. What do they not do? Sometimes they get quiet. So you have to be observant of what's actually going on. And what's the difference between listening and hearing? We know that. Your face can't reveal something different than what your language is saying. People recognize duplicity. If you say, yeah, I'm here to help you, but you got your arms crossed, and it doesn't sound like you're really there. So this is important, and this is one of those things where you can practice with people what body language should look like. This stuff is obvious. Finger pointing, shoulders shrugging means different things in different cultures. Walking to the table real quickly. What's the problem here? It sends the wrong message, the wrong kind of energy. You want to bring that high energy down. Calm. I'm here to solve the problem. Let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this, and we can get you back to having a nice dining experience. Eyes, eye contact. Look at these three eyes. What do they say to you? The one on the left looks to me a lot more positive than the one in the middle. Okay, but people make assumptions based upon what their background is. Some cultures, you can't look them in the eye if you're a senior person, if you're a junior person talking to a senior person, because it's a sign of disrespect. So these things are really important. Personal space. 1.5 to 3 feet is a good distance to be talking to someone, still close enough to be heard, but not close enough for them to grab you by the tie and pull you over the bar. Okay, that was one of the things that I went through with a very comprehensive training here, and they talk a lot about sometimes what you need to do to protect your physical space. How you stand in front of someone just slightly to the right, so you're very well balanced. Let your hands be visible. Police say that all the time. Show me your hands. They want to make sure you don't have something in there, you're not hostile. But again, tone, tenor, demeanor really communicate a lot before you even start having a conversation, okay? So we talk a little bit about tone. Lowered voice means different things to different people. Okay, in my household, as you probably can tell, we were a pretty loud, a boisterous crew. But there are other places where that's not the case. And people sometimes misunderstand. They perceive Asians to be, mild and mannered. I can tell you, having spent a lot of time with a lot of my Asian friends, frequently that is not the case. So you gotta be careful of stereotypes. But then still, you need to go through these things and understand how they impact how the other person is receiving. I speak slowly and purposefully when I'm I lower my tone. I'm controlled. Sir, I'm not upset. Could you please lower your voice? Could you stop cursing, because this is a family environment. Now, I'm not doing that to you. So it's really important that you get this. And we have this next one, which will really help you understand how inflection of your voice makes a whole lot. So I'm going to read these statements, and typically when we do a live one, I'll have somebody read them. So the statement is, I didn't say you were stupid. So I'm going to do it this way. I didn't say you were stupid. The hostess said it. I didn't say you were stupid, but I did write it on the bulletin board. I didn't say you were stupid. I said the team was stupid. And I didn't say you were stupid. I really think you're an idiot. Now, I think we all have seen something similar to this, so you can certainly understand how you emphasize, which words you emphasize make all the difference. So I am here to help solve the problem. So you make it clear that you're in control if you're the manager, and that's how I always approach things when I was a GM in restaurants. So section 2, active listening and looking for cultural cues. Okay, how are we doing so far? We're in pretty good shape time-wise, and we'll have time for questions. And so far, no glitches. So listening. One of the most important things that we need to learn that very few people spend time doing. Now, I'm a talker for a living, and sometimes people accuse me of not listening, but I've made this a priority to be very attentive to what people are saying and also what they're not saying. So 3 aspects of it: attending, being there present, not on your cell phone while you're talking to somebody. You be there now, and then you're following. Yep, I hear what you say. That's right. That would be really concerning to me. And then reflecting. Let me make sure I understand. This is probably the most important thing, is being able to characterize what they said, what the problem is, what the issue is, using their words so that you can create this empathetic relationship and people feel like you really understand the issue. Did I get it right? Is that really what's going on here? Okay, so it's really not a food problem, it's a service problem. That's really what it is, okay? It's important for us to separate what the cause of the issue is, okay? So active listening, there are, like I said, no other activities going on. You're not multitasking and trying to do things at the same time. Give people your full attention. Empathy. The definition of empathy is walking in another person's shoes. Native culture says never judge a man, and I added a woman, a person to it, until you've walked 3 moons in their moccasins. So that's 3 months. So you really don't want to judge a person until you've been in their shoes. So if you're not Black, you might not know that this African-American customer had a day full of slights. They got pulled over, got stopped for doing this or that, and that they perceive to be because of their race. Women on the phone call, that frequently you've had experiences where people don't take you serious or they treat you differently, and it's easily to attribute that to your gender. So being empathetic to a person and say, look, you know what? I haven't walked in your shoes, but it certainly sounds like this is really a problem for you. You try not to be judgmental, and don't ignore the little things because they might be really important to them. Oftentimes with issues in restaurants, people just want to be heard. They want to tell you, and they want someone to listen to them and then acknowledge that, okay? So as I said, again, state, restate, clarify. And a number of these slides restate the same themes because it's important to do this in a diversity of perspectives so that, one phrase might work better for me, but maybe another phrase works better for you. And again, putting yourselves in their shoes. Boy, how would I feel if it's my mom's 85th birthday and dinner just got screwed up, okay? What do I do when the guests are standing by while 2 people are fighting over their political opinions? So I'm a pro-Trump and I'm anti-Trump, or pro-Hillary or anti-Hillary. We've had bunches of those things that have come up. And most cases, we're just there to serve the food and take care of the guests. We don't want to get into politics. But unfortunately, with today's society the way it is, this stuff will present itself. And if we're responsible leaders, we have to anticipate some of these things so that we can be in a position to at least have thought through what a couple of my options might be. So we focus on 2 groups for catching cultural cues. Obviously, I could have 3 or 4 more slides that would cover Asian, LGBTQ. We could have something for disability. We have a good relationship with our disability community, and we have good consultants. And also we could do something that connected to the U.S. military and how they feel sometimes misunderstood. But because so much of what we've seen over the last 18 months, it has focused mostly on African Americans and Latinos, we thought we'd give you a few pieces there. So with African Americans, and this is true with other Blacks as well, space matters sometimes, particularly for African Americans because of our history where the Black folks weren't allowed to be in certain places, and they were very protective of their space for fear that the Ku Klux Klan or somebody would show up on them. We, by nature, culturally, are animated. There are other cultures that are animated. Italians are animated, okay? So don't overreact because people are animated or filled with passion. Again, a lot of that stuff comes into stereotypes. Not every person who's Black plays basketball. I am living proof. I played hockey, okay? So, and then with some posture and stance, nonverbal cues are watched very carefully. I was taught all as a young boy, don't eyeball me, boy. Don't look at me like that. Take that tone out of your voice, okay? So we will socialize that. And not every group, doesn't apply to every African-American family and every Black, but this is stuff that if you talk to others from the African-American community, they'll agree with a lot of this. The same is true with Latinos, and Angie is on our team. She's from the Dominican Republic, so she and many of our other consultants who are also Hispanic Latino have helped us. And, this whole abrazo thing, we're comfortable with kissing on the cheek and all that. Don't misread what that means. They could be saying hello to somebody and still be really upset about something that happened in the restaurant, okay? And also, we don't get into the abrazos and the hugs if we're not part of that culture and we're not invited. And in today's environment with Me Too, we probably don't do much of that anyway. But still, it's important to understand that's a critical part of the culture, as is the family coming together and dining out in larger groups with extended family. Uncles and aunts will show up sometimes. So in some countries, the authority figures, are not looked in the eye. Again, it shows a sign of disrespect. This is true in certain African cultures and others, Asian as well. And depending upon the country of origin, they may not feel that comfortable with institutions. So the restaurant company, a chain restaurant, it's corporate. And also the immigration status might have something to do with it. I don't really want to get involved with too much of the management because, my immigration status, but I still have an issue. And I might be forced into a conflicting circumstance because somebody made an assumption about me being legal. And we have a number of those things. You're illegal, go back to your country, all that kind of stuff. So it's there watching and learning cultural cues, talking to your other employees who represent different cultural groups and say, hey, what kind of things should I know about engaging people from this particular community that will help me better understand and that will help me send the right body language? Those things are also important. So a few more things here. We catch cultural stereotypes. Perception is reality. And all you have to do is ask yourself, what are the stereotypes you have about Asians? Okay? And Asians are much more than just Chinese and Japanese, and Southeast Asian, South Asian Indians. There's a whole lot more there. And we have stereotypes about them being this or that. How does that play out in the restaurant setting? How do we treat them based upon the stereotypes? What are our stereotypes about Blacks or Hispanics, LGBTQ? We have lots of issues coming up with LGBTQ, in particular transgender, because we have blind spots. We don't know a lot about the transgender experience. And some of us, including how I was raised, we're encouraged to see that group as bad for whatever reason. And so when you get educated, as many of us are, and I certainly am a big advocate of the LGBTQ community today, we have to watch how our actions build into support and play out around stereotypes, okay? So when it comes to people with disabilities, we have also a low level of knowledge. What that means is we have blind spots. Unless you've been involved with the disability community, you may not know that the wheelchair is an extension of a wheelchair user's body. Touching their wheelchair is not encouraged, okay? Some people would be okay with it, but many people are offended by that. Angie, who's with us on this call, is from the Dominican Republic, and she has a natural hairstyle, and sometimes it's spiked out. We walk to the airport, and people touch her hair all the time. That's a no-no. You don't touch people's hair. You don't touch babies on their head. There's lots of cultural things that might be different for us who were born and raised here in the States, but for people from other parts of the world, there's lots of things that involve around touch and communication that all can lead to conflict in the workplace. Keep it simple. The less you know about another cultural group, the more likelihood that there's going to be some cross-cultural conflict. So if you have a significant number of guests or employees who are coming from one particular group, it makes good sense to learn a little bit about them. If you're near a military base, understand how veterans feel. 1% I think is the number I heard of Americans who serve in the military or have somebody who serves in the military. Years ago, everybody served in the military post the war. And so we don't understand of the commitment and the challenges that go through them, lots of stereotypes around that. And we have to be very, very careful as we go through these things. So in the third section, and then from this section, we'll get into the scenarios, and then I'll take questions and answers. We also have the thing of leaving people options. So there's some things not to do, you know. So I recruited our former governor of California, you know, our black man. Don't do these things, okay? Avoid becoming emotionally involved. And I'm an emotional person, so I have to unplug that when there's conflict. I need to purposefully leave my emotion at the door, okay? Don't get into power struggles. If somebody wants to keep the menu, keep the menu. If somebody wants to fight over the food, let them take the food. Yeah, it's not worth getting into a struggle, because if you get into a power struggle, you think about a tug of war, somebody's going to get hurt. And it's just not worth it, okay? Avoid being too rigid in the process, okay? This is how we roll here. This is how we do things. It's an automatic. Well, you know, frequently not everything is automatic. There's sometimes a period of gray, and sometimes, you know, people who are regular customers who spend a lot of money in the restaurant, they get away with things that other people don't. And we, truth be told, know that sometimes there's a lot more flexibility with men versus women, with whites versus people of color, with Americans versus immigrants, okay? You know, and so we have to be smart and sensible about that. Avoid telling the other person, you know, how they feel, because you don't. Frequently, people tell me that, you know, we unfortunately lost a son in an auto accident 12 years ago. And people go, oh, I know how you feel. No, unless you lost a child, you do not know how we feel. So keep that in mind. That said, listen, you know, wow, that must be really difficult. I can't imagine having gone through that. Let me see if I can help, okay? So avoid raising your voice. I mean, making threats. These sound simple, but the work that we have been doing over the, like I said, 18, 24 months, it's like we should know better, but we don't. If we don't practice these things, we don't do them well. Sports know that. Why do they practice all the time? So that they can be good and ready come game time. Sometimes we don't practice it. And this thing of conflict across groups and people is going to be with us for a long time. A lot more of this going on, okay? And obviously, you know, don't attempt to intimidate. I'm the general manager here. I can do such and such. If they're hostile and they're dangerous, that's not going to work for them. You know, all you can do is make it worse. So some reminders: remain calm and listen. Listen is the most important thing. Again, people just want to be heard. I understand why you might be upset, okay? Doesn't say I agree with you. I see it's a birthday and you're upset. But, you know, the food was cooked properly and maybe you made the wrong order, and let's try to figure out, no, I can't comp the whole table. No, that just wouldn't be right. I can't be in business if we were doing that, okay? Look for nonverbal cues. You know, people will give you nonverbals, okay? Bring another person along, sometimes just to be another pair of ears. But don't bring the military. Don't bring your biggest guys as if, you know, wow, there's a black couple over here and they bring all the people and we're going to, you know, somehow, or it's a biker group and you got to, no, I brought my manager along so that we both hearing this so we can act upon it if there's something that we need to do. You know, and again, this is stuff that you should discuss ahead of time. How are we going to handle these kinds of circumstances? You know, how do we want it? Who's going to be the person that asks the guest to leave? Is that always going to be the general manager? Well, she may not always be there. Late night things happen and it's a new manager, you know, 25, 26, 28-year-old manager who's on at the night shift. You know, sometimes they're going to have to make the call. So you should go through that, okay? So when you give options, it's like once you get up from the table, we can talk about our options, okay? If you do this, then I can do that. If you stop cursing and yelling, we can talk about how we can finish the dining experience. If you can't do that, we might have to bring the dining experience to an end, okay? So let's, before we go into the scenarios, or as we go into the scenarios, I want to review what we saw initially, okay? We saw this one here. I'm not going to run it through the whole thing, but I would typically ask you, what did you see in this? And if we were here live, what we would do is you see that the guest was complaining about the food. And then he reaches across and physically grabs this young lady. So right there, now I don't know what the policy is for your restaurants, but we know some restaurants, it's like the customer's always right. And I can tell you we have 3 customers right now who are thinking that policy through, because sometimes the customer isn't right, okay? When the customer is, you know, being racist or sexist, saying foul things or doing things that put people at risk or hurt the overall dining experience, or in a hotel category, in a hospitality situation. You're impacting the hospitality of another guest. Boy, we got issues. Second thing that happened in this video that you can observe when you is that once they got into the altercation, where's the manager? He didn't get as clearly in front of them as he needed to. And also, the rest of the staff are standing around watching. You'll notice near the end of the video, she leaves the front line, goes to the back, and then she comes back to the front. Why did she come back to the front? She came to the front to get her cell phone, which easily, young people, even old people like me, we don't go anywhere without the cell phone. The staff could have been trained to grab that stuff and move it differently. Okay, so let's look at some of the potential responses here that could have been used. Okay, so response A: apologize to the guest, finish the order, and send the guest on his way as quickly as possible to avoid further confusion. B: confront the guest and physically remove him from the sports bar. Get other employees as a backup in case the guest resists. Or C: intervene to ensure there is no more physical contact between the guest and staff. Escort the guest out of the restaurant immediately. If he refuses, call the police. Each of these has a why, which I'm not going to go into. You could take a look at that. But typically, if I had a raise of hands, who thinks it's A, B, or C, we would get a little bit of a mix, but most people would probably land on the right response, which is response C, okay? So response C, why is that the right response? Intervene. Because there was physical harm being done to employee or guest. And the guest physically grabbed her, she protected herself. Was a punch the way to do it? I don't know. In the heat of the moment, that's what she did. She's a trained kickboxer, that's what she did. But should have been in between. And then violence will not be tolerated because other guests are listening. They see how you handle this. You have to leave now. You did that. You have crossed the line. So we need to walk you to the door and get them out. If they don't leave, this is where your backup would be there. Someone would be calling the police right away. We have a guest that won't leave. And that's how the manager should stay close by to make sure that he doesn't go out and cause damage to the parking lot or the building or something else. Again, as we said, the other employees have a role. Help the young lady who was assaulted to try to calm her down, get her belongings, get her where she's probably going to be taking the rest of the shift off. Because what happens when these kinds of things occur is your brain goes into freeze mode, okay? Goes into freeze mode. I think I have a question there somewhere. I want to make sure we get that. And it takes a good 20 minutes to come back to normal. And if whenever you're afraid or scared, all that adrenaline just floods your brain and you can't think rationally. So you have to plan for those kinds of things.
I have a question, Jerry, if you'd like me to read it to you.
Sure, read it out.
So how do you handle if the employee would like to press charges?
Oh, good question. So again, this is one of those things that if you say, what if this happens in our restaurant? What might be the case? You will have already thought those circumstances out. I think I'm not a lawyer, but my common sense and my experiences in the past is that employees could press charges. Now, in this case, he could press charges back because they got video where she gave him a pretty good piece of her mind. But again, that's something that should be talked about. Do you really want employees suing guests? Probably not. But do they have the right? Probably. How far is it going to go? It's probably simple assault. There are other circumstances when people are really hurt or killed where lawsuits are common. But I would think this is something you should run by your general counsel, your legal people. And again, if you play out the top 5 most common issues that occur in your restaurant or hotel or your food service establishment, hospitality venue, you kind of know what they are. People skipping out on a check, people complaining about service, people complaining about food quality. Now it's common for people to be talking loud enough where they're using F-bombs and cursing and doing all those kinds of things that make it difficult for people to have and enjoy their dining experience. If people come in with offensive stuff on their shirt, offensive clothing. We had an example where somebody came in and they had, foul word, blank Trump in his wall or blank Hillary in her, whatever. And I don't want to get into politics, but is that appropriate to have obscene language on your shirt or on your or anywhere else. No. But when we asked the managers in this training, half of them said, yeah, that's fine. It's a free country and, freedom of speech. Well, no, you don't get to upset somebody else's dining experience. These are things that the company and the leadership have to think through and have a policy, because managers are supposed to be taking care of the dining experience and the staff and making sure that we're running profitable, highly successful, service-oriented businesses. And if they're spending their time trying to figure out what the policy is because you haven't taken the time as leaders to develop them, and then they're spending their time on the wrong thing. Now, I'll add one more piece before I go to the next scenario. For the first time in all my years, and we've been doing MFHA's work for 24 years, the first time last summer where somebody said, we need help with our employees to give them coping skills. How do they cope with the stress? So this case was a quick service restaurant where people are coming in saying, you Hispanics are stealing the jobs, and so when you hear that stuff constantly, it wears on you. Another instance with a high-end steakhouse in New York City. The host, the general manager, a Hispanic woman, told us that there's some days that I really want to cry because I don't like people calling me a racist. So this stuff is going on. The culture shift is moving. And we as an industry, you and your companies and leaders, you kind of have to respond to this stuff. If somebody comes to you on social media and they got their camera out, what's the policy? If you got somebody with 2 million followers, they come in and say, I'm going to go on my site and say that you're this or you're that. I mean, this is difficult to put managers in that position and not knowing what to do. So again, I think you need to have spend some time in playing out the scenarios and thinking them through to their end and asking management to have some decisions. Because I will tell you, a lot of people are changing customer behavior policies, implementing customer behavior policies, customers' code of conduct. And I think you need more of that. Is there another question, Angie?
Yes, there is. One of the most frequent types of bias we encounter in our all industries, such as the hospitality, is ageism. How do our younger leaders deal with guests who have an immediate age bias towards them?
Boy, I knew you folks were going to have good questions, but that's not the first time I've heard this question, but it is a very appropriate one. Again, we have to talk about what are some of the attitudes that older guests, patrons, suppliers, anybody that you come in contact with and do your business bring to the marketplace. Oh, you young people don't know what you're doing. Or you this or you that. What are the things that occur most frequently? And I in my experiences, people doing what I call pouring haterade on millennials, okay, and Gen Z, because we don't understand the phone and how the phone is a big part of their life. Some of us can't even use their phone very well. I'm guilty of that, as my grandkids remind me. That people, so you got to come up with what they are and list them, and then young people have to be trained on a response. So what's a reasonable response? Sir, I understand that you might have a bias against us people because we're young, but truth be told, we work just as hard as the boomers, and we're just as committed. I'm confident I can do a fine job. I think it would be unfair for you to judge me without giving me an opportunity to wait on the table and let you know just how serious I am about customer service. So something similar to that. But these again are scenarios that the younger cohort will tell us. Here's what they're saying. We have issues where someone says, I don't want a black person waiting on my table. What does the food server do there? If you're African American, do you reassign the food server and then bring somebody who's non-African American? These are real things happening in restaurants every single day. And there's nuance. And so we have to work on how we manage through these things. And the best way to do that is have conversation with people. We seem to get a lot of questions here, but this is good. I like that. We have, Angie, you have another one?
We do. A comment first. So we can coach on behavior of guests towards employees and employees towards guests and have a planning process. What about when it's guests towards other guests?
Okay. This is another incident. This has happened. I've had several instances that have involved me personally. So we had one locally here where guests were having a discussion of guests about what? Politics, okay? And they got loud and then they started cursing. And so management has to, again, you have to withhold judgment. You can't determine who's right or who's wrong, even if you support that candidate or that candidate. Again, the things that you need a policy for, and those kinds of things, sir, and it's not always men. This happened to involve a female professor. I'm sorry, folks. We are focused on delivering customer service for everybody here. Right now, your conversation is disrupted, and we need to stop what we're doing. So if one of you need to move, we'll try to accommodate that. But you need to be respectful of the others. And if that can't work out, then we have to look at other options. I wouldn't immediately say I'm going to throw you out, but that's the inference. In this case, one of these people was asked to leave. The African-American woman was asked to leave. The other one was a regular customer. And of course, it ended up in social media, on the radio, and we get the call, and it goes from there. So I think guest-on-guest issues, we're seeing more of that. We've actually seen an increase in whites saying, you guys are discriminating against me because I'm white. And those are surprising for people to see that, but it's happening, and it's not just with young people, it's not just with immigrants. Frankly, it's a bunch of folks that are much older, people that would be my mother's age that were having some of these things. Another question.
Is there a way to get racist or sexist individuals to realize that they are racist or sexist?
Well, you know what? If I could put that in a can and sell it, I would be a rich person. Okay, that's a hard thing to do, and again, much of what I've said, not everything applies to every person, but sometimes people don't know what they're saying is racist. Okay, so a good example, just in the training we just did recently in Chicago for one of our customers. 2 times people said, yeah, well, we have colored people on our team as well. Colored. And after the second time, I had to say, let me give you a little piece of coaching. Okay, now it was done in real time. I typically would like to do it, to the side, but we were in the middle of the session and this individual had already said it twice. I didn't want him to say it a third time. I said, you may not know, but it's considered in poor form to call people of color colored. So that was a term used for African Americans and blacks, and it is viewed as being antiquated. It's just like you don't call Asians Orientals anymore. Though there was a time where these words worked. Used to call blacks, African Americans, Negroes. You can't do that anymore. There's a bunch of these things that are unwritten. We probably should write the book on it, Angie, and we could hear all the things that are out of taste. You don't talk about LGBTQ as a lifestyle. People from the LGBT community don't think it's a lifestyle. It's how they were born. Now, you don't have to like that or believe that, but I do think we have to call them out when that is we see that as racist, and that's not acceptable here, okay? Now, it might be a surprise to some people, and there's really not much you can do if it is a surprise. But you can tell them, we can't change how you think, but we influence that. We wish we could. Our job will be to tell you how you need to behave when you're in the restaurant. And so in this case, one of our customers had a guest who said he didn't want black people sitting next to him. Well, that's great. You can have that opinion. You just can't have that opinion in this restaurant and talk about it and say it out loud. There may be lots of things that people think, but once it comes out of their mouth and they start to behave, and most importantly, when they begin to affect and impact other people's dining experience, that's where we cross the line. That's where freedom of speech goes out the window. I don't want a 6-year-old kid in my restaurant who's learned to read saying, hey, that guy's shirt says F da 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 boom. Who wants that? So you can't have people with clothing or tattoos that display obviously racist, sexist kinds of things that are not acceptable within the organization. So this means the company, if it hasn't thought about those things, has to think about those things. We're organizing a group of companies to come together next month to talk about some of these trends that are happening in restaurants. And let's separate fact from fiction, and then let's figure out what kind of policies will make sense. We don't want to have policies that are so restricted that, people got to color within the lines. But we do want to send the message to all of our people that everybody is welcome here. And we want to give everybody good customer service, regardless of the package that God put them in. Angie, is there another question?
There is a comment on handling emotions. We can support our teams to handle and manage emotions. We cannot unplug emotions, as mentioned. Emotions will come whether we are conscious, unconscious, intentional, or not. Supporting people to be better at managing emotions, that's the key.
Yeah, emotional intelligence. Well stated. I appreciate the correction. Whoever gave it to me, I appreciate it. For me personally, what I meant to say, I probably should have said, is for me, I have to try to disconnect my emotional feelings around this thing. So as a man of color, I've lived some things that skew the way I see the world and the way I look at things. But sometimes when I'm dealing with a circumstance, I got to take all that stuff and park it in the parking lot. I can't bring that baggage in because it gives me blind spots. So that was good coaching that you offered there. You can help people to learn to manage their emotions, try to look for ways to get around it. Part of that is once you know there are certain things that get you, that are your hot button, okay? And so I have people on my team and say, look, this one, I have a real tough time with that. So I need you to help me work through that. Sometimes they give me coaching. Sometimes they're there to handle that question or that issue and said, I had a bad experience. I'm very emotional about it. I can't answer that. I ask Andre if he'll address it. And that's knowing yourself. I think that's a smart thing. Angie, another question?
The person just mentioned, thank you. That's a great awareness we're sharing. And then there was another comment about something that you said earlier, and the person responded, I will kick them out. And that may bring another point, when to kick someone out.
Yeah, I think once you're clear about what you stand for, it's pretty clear when people cross the line, and there are some offenses which you got to go right now. Your dining experience is over. We're talking about whether you'll ever be allowed to come back here again. Okay, so sometimes you just got to get right to it. But again, I know a lot of us leave these things up to managers to figure out, and in most cases we do a good job. But there are things around race, ethnicity, sexuality, identity are really difficult. And I strongly urge that you don't leave it to managers to figure those things out. When you start to collect what those things are, what that might look like, because you may have to play this back in the media. So why did you do that? Well, we have a policy. Why do we have a policy? Because this has happened 8 times, and we have this or that as a rationale for us establishing this posture on this particular issue. Then it sends a message to the communities, whether it's media, whatever, that you're smart. You had a thoughtful approach to how you implement policy, and when you have someone to leave. I mean, that's not what we want to do, but just like sometimes we have to help our employees find new employment, it's not easy. So the more you talk about it up front, the better off you are. So I have a few more slides. I'm going to go real quickly to the next scenario because I don't have much time left after this, but we covered some really good ground here. So this one is a meeting of exclusion or inclusion, and Sally and Jennifer are both here driving back from a manager, and Sally talks about, can you believe what happened? Every time I tried to make a comment, the regional supervisor ignored me. And then Jennifer says, well, that was bad, but how about Matt taking my idea as his own? We have all seen these kinds of things happen in our environment, and a lot of this stuff is driven by bias or unconscious bias. So as we reflect, you got a list of ways you can respond to any of these situations. What are the implications of the responses? This gets to when we would kick somebody out. And do we have a bias that's leaning us, right or left in a particular direction? And that's a nice balance, nice way to check what you're doing and making sure that what you're doing and what you're saying is going to be balanced and it's going to be equitable for all people involved. So some insights and some suggestions, on that situation. Sally felt like she was ignored. Women and people of color often feel like they're outsiders, that the men's club is having a conversation, doesn't include them. So it's really important for all of us to check who the out group is. So when you're having a conversation, is everybody being included? Are their contributions being listened to? Okay, that's how you work on a blind spot. Assume that some of these things might be happening, and if you check, you're going to find out if they are or not. Okay, the rest is pretty straightforward. The people who don't feel respected when when they're not communicated with in a way that's inclusive. The body language is saying the wrong thing, or if their actions are outright taking their ideas. Those are issues that we always have to be mindful of. So we already did a little bit of the Q&A, and we raised your hand. So I'm gonna get to the reminders and the wrap up. Anticipate. You heard me say that a lot today. Anticipate what could happen. Have a plan. Practice and role play the most similar ones, the ones that happen most often. Somebody's, whether it's around race, around transgender, there's a bunch of them, disability. Just have a plan, practice them, be consistent, fair, firm, and consistent, and respect and dignity for everyone, even if you disagree with them, even if you don't like them, they're still guests and we have to treat them as such. So the recommendations that I would have is this content will be available to you. Obviously, the webinar is going to be on the chart website. Review the content. Discuss it with somebody you trust. Do some self-reflection. If you don't know what your blind spots are, what your biases are, ask someone close to you. If you have a significant other, a spouse, a child, a family member, what are my biases? Do I have any biases? Guarantee they will tell you. They will tell you about some things, and then work on them. I know I have a bias against tattoos on people's neck. I don't think that's the right place for them, and I have no right to impose that bias on someone else. What I learned from my unconscious bias journey is that bias about tattoos on people's neck was really about bias of tattoos on women's neck. So my sexism was coming through on top of my bias, okay? So now I catch myself. I consciously don't make a point not to let that influence how I think or how I behave, and I tell my team. Watch videos over your lunch. Go on YouTube. Type in bias, unconscious bias. Type in de-escalation. You're going to see some great stuff there. Take an online assessment and share what you've learned with the team. So I want to thank Tara Davey, who's been a longtime supporter of MFHA and me personally for giving us the opportunity to be with you here today. I want to thank you all for being attentive, asking good questions, and I hope that this is helpful. Tara?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerry, very much for that. That was excellent. All this webinar will be on our website by the end of the day. And again, feel free to look at our website for all of our previous webinars, which are up there as well. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you at a future webinar. Bye, Jerry.
Bye. Thank you.